Clapper board, you're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled The War of Silent Stars. He was a legend among aliens until he insulted a human fallen friend. HFY Sci-Fi Short Stories. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. They called it the Whispering Front, not because it was quiet, because it taught you to whisper to yourself to stay sane. Static ate the bands. Flares ate the sensors. An invisible tide of charged dust rolled through the old trade routes, and ships that relied on perfect information died like gulls in a storm. The nebular drifts out beyond the Perseus spur were deadly enough. But then the Zyri came, sleek, faceted hulls like cut obsidian, engines that glowed with impossible mathematics, and they built their empire inside the storm. They were born to silence. They loved it. Humans were not. On the 23rd day of the blackout, a human cruiser named What Remains drifted on minimal power, a burnt thread in the dark cloth. Her crew spoke in hand signs and hard blinks. They passed paper notes and tapped coded sequences into the deck with bare knuckles. They had learned to live in the hush because they had no choice. In the forward observatory, Commander Jonah Reed set a tin cup on the glass and listened to the hull sing. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, Morse, the ancient language. It slipped through the noise when everything else died. He closed his eyes. Sam would have laughed at this, he thought. Samira Qureshi, with the impossible grin and the black oil streak on her mouth that never quite washed away, would have laughed and said it was his kind of war. Old tricks, she would have said. Old stubbornness. She was not here to say anything anymore. Jonah took the cup away from the glass. The hull was only singing to him, no message. His own heartbeat, maybe, or the drifting resonance of the gravitic anchor they'd sunk into the dust. He'd held it together since the moment she died. He'd rebuilt the coolant mesh with bloody hands. He'd kept his voice calm, his shoulders straight. He'd written the letter to Sam's mother on Earth in careful ink with the bow pen she kept in the comms drawer for old time's sake. He'd held it together. Then the Zyri envoy came. They slid out of the murk with their shields bright. The largest vessel was an arrowhead of obsidian, its prow carved with silver glyphs that looked like falling rain. It was escorted by 6 lean cutters, their heinous engines whispering as if they were afraid to wake the dead. They hailed in light. A wall of luminous runes unfolded on their hull, neutral meeting, standard parley, no fire. Captain Lyon, CEO of What Remains, observed for a long, tense minute and nodded to Jonah. He took a breath he didn't know he was holding. The Zyri had a legend. His name was Kethrin Voss, the laureled, first heir to the quiet breaker of bands. He was the one they sent when they wanted doors opened and planets discouraged. He was the one who'd taken 9 human orbital stations in 9 days during the fall of Thalassa, and offered to return the 10th hole if the survivors lit a memorial for him on their highest mountain. He enjoyed being a story. He came in alone. A small craft launched from the obsidian arrowhead. It looked like a seed. It rotated and drifted, and when it got close enough, a petal peeled back to reveal a figure of silver cartilage and glass bones, delicate, tall, eyes like midnight ponds. He had trophies woven into the translucent silk of his robe, little bands of metal that caught the station's faint light. He stepped onto What Remains like he was stepping into an opera. "Permission to speak," he said, his voice translated through the hushed machines. They'd tuned a laser to a frequency that might survive the shrieking static, had wrapped the translation matrices in a cage of grounded wire, had anchored the coil to the deck like a shrine. "Speak," said Captain CEO. Kethrin smiled. He had a beautiful smile, perfect, precise, practiced. "I am legend among your enemies," he said, "and friend to some of your dead. I come to offer terms." The crew gathered in the wide, hushed bay. They were weary. They were grease and grit in human form. Some of them had brown skin, some pale. Some had eyes full of tears they would not shed. They stood like statues, their hands knotted at their sides. Jonah stood at the front. "Terms," said Captain CEO. Her voice cut through the static like a clean blade. "You will power down, you will release your anchor, you will drift with us into the dark until we find a quiet world. You will live," said Catherine. "This is a generous offer." "You've offered it before," Jonah said, because if no one else would speak, he would. "In Thalassa." Catherine turned his midnight eyes on him. "I have offered it many times. Those who took it have lit lanterns for me in their temples. They sleep safely beneath my memory." Jonah couldn't help it. "What do they call those lanterns?" Catherine's smile widened just a fraction. "Concessions, mercy flames." He looked like a portrait. You could hang him on a wall. "Everyone gives something to the quiet." "Everyone?" Jonah asked. Catherine's eyes moved past him, through the bay. He was cataloging. He was counting hearts. He was marking the places where the ship had been wounded and making a map of the cracks in the people. He was very, very good at this. His gaze landed on the far wall. There someone had tacked up a canvas, hand-painted. The letters were uneven but confident. Samira Qureshi. There was a little oil smear where the brush had skidded. Underneath, names of people who had failed to make it to the 20th day. It was a makeshift memorial. It was all they had. Catherine looked at the letters, then he laughed. It was a small laugh, a ghost of one. The kind you exhale when you notice something silly. The kind you let yourself have because you think no one will mind. Jonah minded. Catherine lifted his hand and gestured like a teacher. "The paint," he said in a tone that would have been patronizing if it contained the slightest interest. "The childlike paint. You are a clever species, so many clever tricks, morse through your bones, a coil in a cage, but then this, as if a smear can anchor the dead." His smile brightened. It was dangerous. "This Samira Qureshi." He did not finish her name. Jonah moved without thinking, then very much with it. He stepped forward like there was no gravity, or like there was an extra kind pinning him to a single action. He felt the entire ship contract around him. He felt everyone breathe in at once and hold. "Do not," he said, and his voice was bigger than his body. The coils hummed. The deck thrummed. His mouth tasted like copper. "Do not say her name in some." The last word he spoke in Zaire. It meant dust. It meant nothing. It meant the silence between two notes. It was curse and prayer. It was the closest thing that language had to spit. You do not speak the name of someone you loved in the vocabulary of the thing that killed them. Catherine's smile curled. "It seems I have found your fulcrum." "Terms declined," said Captain CEO. Catherine looked surprised for the barest moment, as if he had believed no one in this condition. At this distance from anyone who might help them with these wounds and this tiredness would say no. He almost looked delighted. The surprise turned to hunger. "As you wish," he said. He tilted his head, amused, and patted the trophies in his robe. One of them was a band of hammered steel, human steel. A small thing, but human hands had given it shape. Jonah knew it like you know your own scars. Sam had worn a band on her wrist, stamped with the little sigil she'd carved into everything she called hers. It wasn't there when they recovered her. The war of silent stars, he thought. It has rules, but not enough. "Our duel will be quiet," Catherine said, "as is meet." He turned, he bowed, he folded into his seed like a note someone tucks into an old book, and then he was gone. In the hush that followed, someone exhaled in a sob and strangled it before it could live. The coil thrummed. The hull sang. Captain CEO looked at Jonah. He kept his hands from shaking by clenching them so hard his nails bit his palms. "He's baiting you," she said. "Yes," Jonah said. "Do we take it?" He thought about the paint. He thought about the letters. He thought about the way Catherine's eyes had skated over Sam's name like a stone scattering swans on a lake. He thought about a band of steel, missing, now woven into a robe like a joke. He thought about the silence the Zaire loved. He thought about humanity's fondness for noise. And then he thought about something else. The echo of noise in places where sound could not travel. The way you could teach silence to carry it. "We take it," he said, but not like he expects. They slept in shifts, in the hours that stretched and folded like soft cloth. They ate ration bars that tasted like sweet chalk and broth that tasted like salt and apology. The hull vibrated with the distant thunder of Zyri engines. The dust rolled and rolled. Jonah went down to the maintenance bay. In the old days, he'd been a mechanic on an orbital or rig that groaned like an old ship and leaked like an old man. He knew shortcuts. He knew how to make the universe work with string and prayer. He found Mira Akanjo there, sitting on a crate, tapping a screw against the metal edge in a slow, steady beat. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause, tap. "You're drumming too," she said without looking up. "Everyone's drumming, like the ship is a drum already and we're the sticks." "Got a question," Jonah said. "Ask. How much explosive we got if we don't tell the quartermaster?" Mira smiled without humor. "All the good stuff, a handful of interlocks, half a cookie tin of boom sand, 2 cans of old gel that have been sitting so long they're practically joined at the hip." He nodded. "We're going to need it." "You planning to board that arrowhead of theirs?" "Worse." Arched an eyebrow. "Core tap." "Worse," he said again. "I want to humiliate their legend." "I'm listening," he told her. It took 7 hours to decide they were insane and 10 to decide insanity was the only sane option left. They worked in the old ways, chalk marks on metal, whispered arguments, knots tied in cords to carry numbers across rooms when words couldn't. They used their bodies like parts of a machine. They lowered their expectations and raised their hopes. The Zyri moved like predators who had already eaten. Their cutters encircled what remains, their engines purring, their weapons sleepily aware. The arrowhead prowled. Catherine waited, possibly enjoying the thought of the story he was about to make of them. It wasn't a duel, not really. The Zyri didn't duel, not in the human sense. They performed victory. They staged it. They carved it into the night with ritual and light. Catherine had decided to do it here in the Whispering Front, in their own cathedral of hush. He sent a final message, a ring of cold light expanding in their direction, like a whole opening in the universe. Jonah and Mira were on a little craft the size of a pan. It had once been a cargo shell, meant for moving crates between docks. Now it had a skin of mesh and foil and a heart like a clenched fist, a battery made of 6 different kinds of wrong. The hull was studded with cans and gel packs and the kind of homebrew physics that got you medals after you died. "You're sure about this?" Mira mouthed. Jonah nodded. He tapped the deck with his finger, Sam's rhythm. She'd always tapped like she was asking the ship to dance. They launched. Their craft did not move so much as shiver forward, surfing the flood of static. The cutters reacted late. The arrowhead turned its cold face toward them like a cat acknowledging a moth. The Zyri knew 1,000 names for silence. Humans knew one. For humans, silence had always been the thing you broke, the thing you filled. The moment before a kiss, yes, but also the heartbeat before you hit the ground and the gap after a door slammed. They aimed that gap like a weapon. They adjusted the mesh. They unfolded the foil like the wings of a cheap angel. They rigged the battery to a coil. They wrapped the coil in wire. And then they did something no sane spacer did. They turned the silence up. Not down, up. They took the static, the shriek, the roaring dust, and they amplified it to a frequency it had not been built to carry. They sang into the hole with a voice too big for it, and something in the plasma of the storm flinched. The Zyri's engines hiccuped. Their cutters staggered like drunk dancers. Catherine's arrowhead tilted, and for one lovely, terrifying second it looked confused. "Now," Jonah whispered, though there was no way for the word to travel. "Now." Mira triggered the gel. The oldest can blew with a sigh, a ripple of kinetic whisper. The second can stuttered like a bad laugh. The boom sand followed, the interlocks bit, the pulse from the homemade coil rose like a tidal wave and collapsed like a lung. On the Zyri channels, things went dark. They loved the quiet. They lived in it. They had designed their ships to be at home there. They were not designed for a rougher kind. They were not built for human silence, the predatory sort, the ambush in an alleyway, the missing tread on a stair. Catherine's ship did not burn. It did something worse. It stalled. The arrowhead's shields flickered and died like candles. Its engines hiccuped, then held their breath. It drifted for a moment, helpless. On what remains, Captain Co did not raise her voice. "Catch," she said. They had anchored themselves to the dust. They had built cables and hooks out of things that were not meant to be either. They had taught the ship to throw a net, and now it did, graceless and glorious. The net unfurled like a banner, and it caught the arrowhead's sleek flank with a sound that was not sound at all but felt unbearably like laughter. The cutters woke. They screamed silently. They moved like knives in honey. Mira pointed at the battery. The indicator was a sorry little needle falling toward red. "Enough," Jonah mouthed. She shook her head. "Never enough." They turned the coil again. The field warped. In the dark between stars, the arrowhead shivered. Catherine Voss, the laureled, had the kind of mind that understood defeat intellectually. At the precise moment the heart began to believe impossible things. He had never lost a staged victory. That was the secret of being a legend. You wrote the story. It loved you back. Now someone else held the pen. He did not panic. He did what he had done 1,000 times before when the quiet gave him a puzzle. He moved. His seed unfolded from the belly of the arrowhead and arrowed toward Jonah's ridiculous craft. It came fast. It came clean. Mira grinned. "Here he comes," she said. Jonah stared at the silver seed, a perfect thing, beautiful and terrible, and felt no fear. He had Sam with him. He had her name. He had the missing band. He had the paint. He had a universe of small, stubborn things. "Remember the rhythm?" he asked. Mira lifted her screw. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause, tap. The seed did not have a translator with lungs. It had direct band lasers and the cold eloquence of math. It couldn't hear their little tapping, but Jonah heard it. He knew it. He knew humans. He knew that rhythm meant ready, wait, ready, go. At the last second he cut power. They fell. Not far. Only far enough to be somewhere else when the seed knifed through where they'd been. Jonah threw their little craft under the belly of the arrowhead, where the net's hooks dug into alien skin. He reached out with a gloved hand and touched the Zyri hull as if it were a living thing he had to calm. It was warm. He felt the machine like you feel a horse under you that is about to bolt. He clicked a clamp. Not a heroic clamp. Not a clamp designed for this war. A clamp he'd once used to hold a crate of figs steady long enough to keep them from mutiny. It bit. They were attached. The seed curved, graceful as a predator in water, and came back around for a kill that would breach both their tiny hull and their hope. "Talk to him," Mira said. Jonah blinked. "Me. You're the one with the Zyri curses." He flicked their coil, tuned it with fingers that had rebuilt engines in darkness and stitched wounds in silence. He burned the last of the battery on something insane. He created a whisper. He said into Zyri, "Your trophies are heavy, legend." Catherine's seed stuttered. "It makes a sound," he said, almost with relief. "You make a sound." Jonah pictured him in there, long hands, midnight eyes, the robe scraped aside, the missing band of steel near his heart. He said, "You carry a band that belongs to a woman whose name you do not get to say. You wear her weight and pretend it is yours." Catherine was silent. The seed hung in the void. The cutters frenzied themselves, futile. The arrowhead rolled, confused and insulted by a net made of scrap. The whispering front roared like a crowd. "Return it," Jonah said. "Take nothing from us unsaid." Catherine laughed softly. It was not the small laugh in the bay. It was older. It had edges. "You cannot ask me this." "I'm not asking," Jonah said. "I'm making a story." He looked at the needle. It touched red and bled past it into a place that was not even a color. They had seconds, perhaps less. He clicked the clamp again. He jammed a little lever with his thumb. The clamp groaned like a hernia. The net tightened. What remains reeled them both in like clumsy fishermen catching a whale in a river. Catherine watched all of it. He had known 1,000 humans, touched dozens, spoken to hundreds. He had altered laws, toppled orders, soothed catastrophes by offering easy doors. He had always been the louder legend in the room. No one had ever asked for something so small and made it feel so large. Because it was not small, because it was everything. He tapped a command into his seed. A compartment opened in his robe. The band of steel slid out like a coin peeled from a magician's palm. He looked at it for the first time as if it were not a pretty token, not a charm, not a weight, as if it were a person. He pressed it, slowly, careful even now, against the inside glass of his seed where Jonah could see it. He held it there. Then, in a move every attached camera on every Zyri cutter recorded and then tried to erase from the world, he let go. The band drifted free. It spun once. It winked. It fell not down because down was a lie, but toward Jonah as if human gravity had reached out and remembered what it owned. Mira reached through the open hatch, barehanded in a place no one went barehanded, and caught it with a gasp that was a laugh that was a cry. Her skin blistered. She did not notice. Jonah looked at Catherine. "Now," he said, "we fight." The seed swooped. They had nothing left in the battery. The clamp holding them would snap under real stress. The net was not designed for this. The cutters had almost chewed free the lines. The arrowhead was waking. They were about to be dust in the quiet. The band was hot in Mira's palm. The coil was a dead snake. Jonah felt all of this. He felt something else too. He felt very human. He let go. Not of the clamp, not of the plan, of the anger. He kept the fury and set down the poison. "You insulted her," he said. "You made a joke of our way of mourning. You turned our paint into a theater. I wanted to end you for that." Catherine's face was unreadable, but you returned her band and you did not have to. "You made me have to," Catherine said, and there was wonder in his voice. Wonder, not contempt. "Then hear this. We are not a species that lights lanterns for conquerors. We light them for each other. We carry each other in bands and paint and cheap songs. We are ridiculous. We are stubborn. We are loud even when we cannot speak." He touched the deck. He tapped Sam's rhythm. He spoke her name out loud in his own language, which tasted like rivers and iron and rain. "Sam," he shouted, and the coil did not carry it, and the seed did not hear it, but the ship did, and the crew did, and all the human hearts within broadcast it into the stubborn ether. Catherine's eyes closed. When they opened, something had shifted. "Then this is my offer," he said, "this legend, this breaker of bands. In this silent war here now we leave each other, we depart, we do not conquer, we do not fall, we move back into our own nights. You will say I fled, I will say I spared you." "No," Jonah said, "we'll tell the truth." Catherine tilted his head. "We'll say we made you return something that was never yours. We'll say we took your engines by making the silence stronger than you could bear. We'll say your cutters gnawed at scrap while our people used hand signs and knocks to move a mountain. And then we'll say we didn't kill you when we could have tried, because there's a war coming that leaves no one living in the dark. It's bigger than you." Catherine's smile returned, not the portrait, something human in a face that was not human. "Bigger than me. Bigger than us," Jonah said. The seed retreated half a wing beat. The cutters hesitated. The arrowhead trembled. Catherine said in Zyri, "You are so loud." Jonah said in the same tongue, "You will be too when you bury someone you love." He thought he saw the barest twitch at the corner of that midnight gaze. Then Catherine did the most dangerous thing of his career. He broke his own story. He turned away. He fired a controlled pulse at the net, not the kind that would tear it and their hull and the storm itself, but the kind that would loosen without breaking, free without flinging. He guided the arrowhead out of the hooks as if it were a whale he had decided to spare because it was not today the whale he wanted. He slipped the cutters back into a protective sheath, curling them around like the fingers of a hand around something fragile. He left. What remains drifted in the wake of his mercy. Mira's hand shook. She held the band up. It was still warm. It burned her skin. She smiled. "We're starting a terrible rumor," she said. "Which one?" Jonah asked, feeling the tremors in his own body he had forbidden until now. "That the laureled listens. That he is not only loud," Jonah said softly, "but hearing." They limped back to the ship. When they came through the hatch, the crew didn't cheer. That would have been too much. They reached for Jonah and Mira without speaking. They touched shoulders and hair. They reached for the band, and Mira did not let go, and no one asked her to. They carried the band to the memorial wall. Samira Qureshi's name waited in paint. The smear caught the light. Mira leaned her forehead against the wall, and then she placed the band not on a hook, not on a nail, not in some official place, but on the screw she'd been tapping. It sat there, the human metal, and it looked perfect and stupid and holy. Jonah looked at it, and the breath he'd been holding since Catherine had laughed finally left him. He slept for a day. When he woke, he met Captain CEO in the observatory. She looked out into the silent storm as if she were searching for words in the dust. "Reports," he said, his voice rough. "Our little net," she said, "broke 3 ribs of that arrowhead. We snagged her shields hard enough to leave scratches their grandchildren will climb like vines. The cutters chewed through 3 lines and by grace left 4. Our coil is a fossil, our battery is a ghost." And she turned. There was a smile behind her eyes. The kind humans had learned to share when victories were dumb and beautiful and enough. And the Zairi fleet has taken a step back from the whispering front. The storm is big. It fits them, but it fits us too. They will tell a story of strategic rebalancing. They will use words like reconsolidation. We will say we made them forget how to stand. He nodded. "What now?" he asked. The quiet was not empty, it had a heartbeat. "Now," she said, "we go home, we show the band, we send a message to the galaxy, not in light, not in straight words on a straight line, in rumor, in rhythm, tap tap." She touched the glass with a fingernail. "We tell them about their legend, we tell them what made him stop." "What did you did," she said. "Sam did," he said, and the ache in his chest was sweet as bruised fruit. "We all did." She tilted her head toward the hull. "Listen." He listened. The hull sang, not the Zairi whisper, not the storm roar, something else. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. The ship had learned the rhythm. They moved. It took 10 days to crawl out of the whispering front. 10 days of skeins of dust across the glass and knots in the lines and filters clogged with everything the storm could invent. 10 days of old songs hummed into elbows and shoulders. 10 days in which the humans in the crew taught each other the little signs they'd made up for little needs. Water, rest. You're doing great, don't die today. 10 days in which the Zairi cutters shadowed them once and then vanished, uninterested, embarrassed, or perhaps ordered to be other legends elsewhere. They reached the relay at the edge of the storm, a relic that looked like a church made of broken bones, and they plugged in their truth and sent it. Truth is messy. It goes out like a drunk with pockets full of coins and falls downstairs and wakes up in strangers' kitchens with a rooster looking at it funny. But it goes. It went. Human ships picked up the story and told it better. They polished it and scuffed it and threw it like a ball and then set it down gently. Zairi stations sniffed it and said it smelled like human sweat, and then, despite themselves, listened again. A coalition of loop singers on a gas giant turned it into a song you had to walk through to hear. A kid on Ceres painted a band on a wall and wrote Samira in yellow because she liked yellow because she had decided this. It changed as it moved. At the academy on Earth, they asked Jonah to put on a clean uniform and tell it into 100 cameras. He did. He used plain words. He spoke slowly. He did not touch the metal they pinned to his chest like a debt. He did not ask what he owed. He told them how Mira had burned her hand and smiled. He showed them the screw she had kept. He told them how Captain CEO had looked at the storm like it was a problem she loved. He told them how Catherine had looked at a band of steel and seen, for once, not himself. The anchors on the big channels edited it into something sharper. The little feeds left in the pauses. The soldiers in the barracks added the cursing back. The grandmothers in kitchen gardens whispered the Zairi words to their tomatoes and asked the fruit to swell with an enemy's respect. Catherine Voss heard every version. He sat in a sanctuary the Zairi had carved for their names in vacuum. It was a wall of glass that looked at a spin of stars. He pressed his forehead against it and thought about the quiet not as a god, but as a place you could rest. He used to think quiet was a victory. He understood now it could be a mercy. And he thought dangerously that humans might have touched something he had not. A young Zyri captain approached him and stood at respectful hush. "There is a war coming," the young one said. "The old empires in the scattered crown move. They say they come to take the storm and end the quiet. They are loud. They are very, very loud." Catherine thought of a human mechanic with tired eyes and a rhythm that would not stop. He thought of an arrowhead caught in a net made of wrong things and right intention. He thought of a band of steel burning a woman's palm and making her smile. He said, "Good." The captain's eyes widened. Catherine smiled gently. "Then it will be a war where listening is a weapon." He gave an order. The Zyri fleet shifted like a chessboard drawn by a comet. They moved to edges they had not guarded before. They sent emissaries to stations where human flags hung alongside others. They did not lower shields, but they did something harder. They kept their navigational lights on. The coalition, such as it was, noticed. On what remained became more. Sam's band hung on the screw on the memorial wall. Kids too young to have known her came by and touched it with 2 fingers like it was a bell in a temple. Mira built a new coil and painted it a stupid color. Jonah fixed things because he was good at fixing things, and when he ran out of things to fix, he taught new hands the old shortcuts. Captain Sio charted lines through storms and made them look like thread through cloth. One night, if you could call it a night when time was a loop and days were a habit, Jonah found himself alone in the observatory again, tin cup on the glass, listening. He was not waiting for a message. He was listening for the space between. He closed his eyes. He said softly, like a secret he could afford to share, "Thank you." He did not know who he was speaking to. Sam, the ship, the quiet, Catherine himself. The hull answered with the rhythm she loved. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. He laughed and it warmed the room. On the day the scattered crown sent a probe into the whispering front and the Zyri cracked it open like an egg and found the ugly thing inside that would have eaten everyone indiscriminately. The coalition fleet did not argue about radio protocols. They throttled down. They knocked. 4 beats, 3 beats, 2, 1, pause. The storm listened. They moved together. They were not a single species. They were not a single story. They were, if only for an hour, a rhythm that did not break. They buried that probe where it could not crawl out and scream. They lit nothing but each other's faces. The rumor grew teeth and then grew wings and then grew something else, roots. In a quiet room far from the front, at a desk piled with work orders and snack wrappers and drawings kids had pushed under the door without knocking because doors were suggestions, Jonah took a piece of paper. He wrote to Sam's mother in ink that smelled like old library. He wrote. He returned it. He underlined it twice. He folded the letter. He sealed it with tape. He sent it in a courier's hand because he did not want it to travel as light. He wanted it to jostle. He wanted it to meet eyes. He wanted someone to read the address out loud. He wanted the world to be involved in its journey. He wanted it to take time. When the reply came months later on paper thick enough to be an anchor, the first line said, "I knew she would teach someone to tap." He smiled. He put the letter on the memorial wall under the band. He took a picture with a camera that left its soul on the floor in silver crystals. He sent the picture nowhere. He kept it in a box so that it would become a treasure. There were more battles. There were more nights where the hull sang. There were victories that tasted like clean water and defeats that tasted like metal. There were names added to the wall with shaking paint and hands steady enough. Once, in a port where the gravity was too strong and the beer was too warm, Jonah sat on a step and watched the sunset through a window smeared with oil. Catherine sat beside him like a rumor in a person's shape. No bodyguards, no trophies. Just 2 people in a room no one expected to hold anything important. They did not speak. They listened. Neither of them loved the other. Neither of them forgave the other. That would have been a brighter story. They did something harder. They remembered. They remembered a band. They remembered the laugh that had started a war within a war. They remembered mercy offered and returned. Then Catherine rose and left, and Jonah sat a while longer and watched the sun give up on being a coin and become a smear, and thought about how stories were not orders, and became ready again to argue with anyone who suggested they were. When the day came that others gathered to say, in so many languages, that humans could not withstand the long quiet, that the whispering front had taken their songs and left them only whispers, that they should step aside and let more ancient species negotiate the hush, what remains docked in the center of the room. Jonah walked in, not alone. He brought Mira and Captain Sio and a handful of people who had learned to love the silence not because it was a god, but because it was a place they could work. He put the tin cup on the table like an instrument. Then he tapped. 4 beats. 3 beats. 2, 1. The room stilled. Humans knocked on tables. Zairi tapped their delicate fingers against their bones. A species with 8 elbows drummed them one after another like a wave on a shore. Someone somewhere began to weep and did not stop themselves. Jonah said, "We are not leaving." He did not say it in anger. He did not say it with a smile. He said it the way you say, "I remember your name and I will say it right." Because this is not only a war, he said, and he looked at every face like he was reading a wall full of names. It is a place, and we live places, we share them, we endure them, we make them loud, we make them quiet. We put bands on screws and give ourselves reasons to move. There was argument, there were proposals, there were maps drawn and torn. There were nights where the only thing holding everything together was cheap coffee, and that stupid rhythm and the knowledge that somewhere in the dark a legend had once drifted on a decision and chosen loss in order to keep something alive he had not understood until then. In the years after, the whispering front had fewer whispers and more music, not the beautiful kind, the human kind, messy, banged on things, hummed. People started saying the stars weren't silent anymore. It wasn't true, they were just full. One day Jonah found himself again in the observatory, older, tired, necessary. He touched the glass. He put the cup down. He listened, tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. He smiled. He saw Sam as she had been, oil on her mouth, laugh on her teeth. He said her name, he said others. He said them in a row until they were a braid strong enough to be a lifeline. The stars did not answer. They did not need to. Humanity had learned to survive without replies. The galaxy had learned to respect the lack. The ship rolled forward. The dust thinned. The relay lights winked like eyes. Jonah breathed. There would be more legends. Humans could live with that. They had to. Legends were not always tyrants. Sometimes they were warnings. Sometimes they were ladders. Sometimes, mercifully, they were just stories people told each other to stay warm. He poured stale coffee into the cup and drank it and grimaced. He tapped the rim once with a finger, like a priest ringing a bell, then wrote on a scrap of paper a note for Mira, "Need more grounds, preferably not made of despair." He left it on her toolbox. He went to fix a thing that was broken. He prepared to break a thing that was too whole. He carried a screwdriver in his pocket, not a ceremonial one. The screw on the memorial wall had started to wobble. He tightened it. He stood back. He looked at the band and the letters and the layers of paint beneath where other letters hid, not erased but part of the new story in the way forgotten recipes become the flavor you can't name but can't do without. He knocked the rhythm with his knuckle. 4 beats. 3, 2, 1. Then he walked away and the ship walked with him and the stars said nothing. And everything that needed to be heard was already written in the bodies that refused to be quiet and the hands that refused to be empty. And that day, the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken. E&D the story.